I found out I had been excluded at Thanksgiving with my own cranberry sauce, still warm in the kitchen, and my coat hanging neatly by the door like I still belonged there. The injustice didn't arrive loudly. There was no shouting, no dramatic announcement, just a sentence delivered casually between bites of turkey that landed in my chest like a blunt object. "We've already finalized the will," my son Mark said, not looking at me. It just made more sense this way. I was 58 years old, sitting at the head of a table in a house I had helped pay for, surrounded by people who had used my name, my credit, my labor, and my silence for decades. And in that moment, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I had been erased. I smiled, because that is what women my age are trained to do when pain arrives uninvited. I passed the gravy. I nodded. I swallowed my questions along with my wine. But inside, something cracked open. I am Eleanor Price. I raised 2 children. I buried a husband. I built a consulting firm from my dining room table after my marriage collapsed under the weight of his infidelity and my forgiveness. I paid for college weddings, emergency mortgages, and one very expensive rehabilitation stint that no one likes to talk about. And yet, here I was, excluded from my own future. After dinner, as dishes clinked and laughter filled the living room, I stepped outside onto the back porch. The air was cold, sharp, honest. I breathed it in like medicine. Mark followed me a few minutes later. "Mom," he said, already defensive, "don't make this into something it's not." I turned slowly. "What exactly is it then?" He shifted his weight. "It's just simpler. You know, for everyone. Simpler." That word again. The favorite excuse of people who benefit from cruelty. I asked him one question. One, when did I stop being part of this family? He didn't answer. He looked past me, toward the warm light spilling from the windows, toward his wife Claire, laughing too loudly at something my daughter had said. Claire never liked me. She tolerated me. That was different. "Claire thinks it's better if things are clear," he finally said. Less confusion later. I nodded, still smiling. That night, I went home alone. I poured myself a drink I didn't finish. I sat in the dark and replayed every moment from the past 10 years. Every time I had been subtly pushed aside. Every decision made without me. Every holiday where my role was reduced to babysitter, check writer, or background noise. The betrayal wasn't just the will. It was the years of manipulation that led up to it. I didn't sleep. By morning, grief had hardened into something colder, clearer. I wasn't angry yet. Anger comes later. First comes understanding. I called my lawyer before 9. Not the family attorney. Not the man Mark assumed I used. I called a woman named Judith Hale, someone I had worked with professionally years ago, when my company helped restructure her firm after a hostile takeover. She remembered me immediately. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, her voice calm, sharp. "You sound like someone who's been underestimated." I smiled for the first time since Thanksgiving. "I've been excluded," I said. "And I think it was intentional." There was a pause. Then, "Tell me everything." As I spoke, laying out the details, the timeline, the quiet decisions made behind my back, I felt something else surface beneath the pain. Clarity. Judith asked careful questions. About assets, about company ownership, about trusts, signatures, and assumptions people often make about women who stop asserting themselves loudly. When I finished, she said one sentence that changed everything. "Eleanor, I don't think they understand what they've done." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the pale winter light filtering through my windows. "Neither do I," said. "Yet," she exhaled. "If you're willing to be patient, very patient, there may be a way to correct this." Quietly, I closed my eyes. The open loop had formed. I had been excluded. But exclusion cuts both ways, and I had nothing left to lose. At least that's what they thought. The first thing Judith had told me was not to confront anyone. People reveal more when they think they've won, she said. Especially family. That advice went against every instinct I had as a mother. I wanted to demand explanations. I wanted to scream about loyalty and sacrifice and fairness. But I had learned something in my years as a consultant. Emotion clouds leverage, so I stayed quiet. Christmas came and went. I sent gifts. I smiled in photos. I watched Claire post curated snapshots of her perfect life. My grandchildren smiling beside a tree I had helped pay for. The comments praised her. The captions thanked Mark. My name was nowhere. Behind the scenes, Judith and I worked. She asked me for every document I had ever signed, every partnership agreement, every trust amendment, every email related to my company, Price Strategic Solutions, the firm Mark now managed after I stepped back 3 years earlier. Stepped back. Another lie I had told myself. I hadn't stepped back. I had been nudged, gradually, kindly, always with praise and reassurance, always with the implication that I had earned rest. What I had actually earned was invisibility. Judith discovered the first crack in January. Eleanor, she said, voice tight with interest. Did you know you never transferred your controlling shares? I sat up. Of course I did. Mark handles operations. We discussed. No, she interrupted gently. You discussed stepping away from day-to-day management. But legally, you still hold majority voting rights. My hands started shaking. That can't be right. Oh, it is, she said. And it's not the only thing. Over the next weeks, more truths surfaced. The will Mark referenced so confidently did exist, but it depended on assumptions that were never verified. Assets he believed were jointly owned were not. Trusts Claire thought she controlled were contingent. Most importantly, the company they had been using as collateral for their lifestyle was still in the eyes of the law mine. They had excluded me emotionally, but legally, I was still central. The injustice transformed into tension. Delicious coiled tension. Judith warned me again, do nothing yet, so I waited. I watched as Mark made decisions he shouldn't have, signed contracts he didn't fully understand, promised bonuses that depended on cash flow projections based on my original models. I watched Claire encourage him to expand, to impress, to take risks. They thought I was irrelevant. Meanwhile, Judith quietly prepared. In March, the company faced a routine audit. Nothing dramatic, except this time, Judith suggested I attend the board meeting. They can't legally prevent you, she said, and your presence will unsettle them. The morning of the meeting, I chose my outfit carefully. Not powerful, not meek, neutral, controlled. When I walked into that conference room, Mark looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mom, he said, standing too fast. We weren't expecting you. I smiled, polite. I was in the area. Claire's eyes flicked to the empty chair at the head of the table. My old seat. Of course, she said. Please, sit. As the meeting progressed, I said very little. I listened. I observed. I noted who deferred to whom, who avoided my gaze, who assumed authority they didn't have. Halfway through, the auditor asked a question about ownership structure. Silence. Mark cleared his throat. I handle that. The auditor turned to me. Actually, Mrs. Price, according to our records. I met Mark's eyes for the first time. Yes, I said softly. The room held its breath. The truth was rising, and they had no idea how deep it went. The auditor did not finish his sentence. He stopped, glanced at his notes, then at the screen, then back at me, with the cautious respect professionals reserve for landmines they've just noticed. According to our filings, he said carefully, Mrs. Price retains controlling interest through a Class A structure. Mark laughed. Too quickly. That's outdated. Judith's voice came through the speakerphone before the auditor could respond. Calm. Surgical. It is not. Every sound in the room sharpened. The hum of the projector. The faint clink of ice in a water glass. Claire's breath, catching just slightly too late. I'm counsel for Eleanor Price, Judith continued. We submitted updated confirmations this morning. Mark turned to me. His face had lost color. Mom, what is this? I folded my hands. It's accuracy. The auditor resumed now, fully alert. This changes several assumptions underlying recent decisions. Claire leaned forward, smile brittle. Surely this is a misunderstanding, Judith replied. It would be if the documents were unclear. They are not. I watched something subtle happen then. Not panic, not yet. Authority began to slide, like a picture frame slipping off a nail. The meeting ended early. People left with polite excuses and unsettled eyes. Mark followed me into the hallway. You blindsided us, he said, voice low. You excluded me, I replied. We're even. Claire joined us. Her tone sharpened with something close to fear. What do you want? That question always comes too late. I want transparency, I said. And time. Time for what Mark asked. I met his eyes. To understand how my company has been used. That night, I slept for the first time in months. Not well, but honestly. Over the next weeks, Judith and her team pulled threads, contracts rerouted, loans personally guaranteed, without my consent. A quiet shift of liabilities that would have landed squarely on me if things went wrong. Infidelity surfaced too. Not sexual, financial. Mark had trusted Claire with operational decisions she had no business making. She had trusted her brother, who owned a logistics company, that suddenly became a preferred vendor. Favoritism dressed up as strategy. The emotional wound deepened, but it changed shape. Less bleeding, more resolve. In April, Mark asked for lunch. Neutral territory. A restaurant I used to love. I never meant to cut you out, he said, staring at his plate. Claire just thought it was cleaner. Cleaner. That word again. When did you stop questioning what was clean? I asked. He didn't answer. I told him the truth then. Not all of it. Just enough. I'm not here to punish you, I said. But I won't protect you from consequences. His eyes filled. You're my mother. Yes, I said. And that's why I won't lie to you. When we parted, he hugged me awkwardly, like someone unsure of the rules. I let him. It felt like closure, beginning not forgiveness. That evening, Judith called. We're ready. For what? For escalation. I closed my eyes. Do it. The next morning, notices went out. Board review, governance reset, temporary suspension of certain authorities, pending compliance, verification. The word temporary terrified them more than permanent ever could. Claire called me 3 times. I didn't answer, because the next move wasn't emotional. It was structural. And once structures change, people have to decide where they truly stand. Claire showed up at my door, unannounced, on a rainy Tuesday. She looked different, less polished. Hair pulled back too tightly. Mascara smudged, like she'd forgotten mirrors exist for other people too. We need to talk, she said. I considered closing the door. Instead, I stepped aside. She didn't sit. She paced. You're destabilizing everything. No, I said. I'm revealing it. You're punishing us for one misunderstanding. I smiled faintly. If it were one, I might agree. She stopped pacing. What do you want? There it was again. The assumption that everything could be negotiated. I want you to stop, I said. Stop making decisions that don't belong to you. Her laugh was sharp. You're retired. I'm patient, I corrected. She leaned forward. If you keep pushing, Mark will lose the company. I met her gaze. If I stop, I will. That landed. You always hated me, she said suddenly. I blinked. No, I distrusted you because I didn't need you. I shook my head. Because you needed control. Her face twisted. You're jealous of what I asked softly. Being included conditionally. Silence. 2 days later, Judith confirmed what we suspected. Claire had been moving money. Not stealing outright. Shifting. Cushioning. Preparing. Karma doesn't fall from the sky. It's built slowly by people who assume no one is watching. We watched. When the board met again, the evidence was undeniable. Conflicts of interest. Breach of fiduciary duty. Manipulation masked as ambition. Mark sat very still. Claire did not. She argued, deflected, blamed. I said nothing until the end. Then I stood. I built this company. After being betrayed, once I said, I will not lose it by tolerating betrayal again. The vote was swift. Claire was removed from all operational involvement. Mark was placed under review. An external trustee was appointed. When it ended, Mark looked at me with something like grief. You planned this, he said. No, I replied. I survived it. That night, I walked through my house, touching familiar things with new hands. I felt older, stronger, clearer. The escalation was complete. What came next would hurt, but it would also end. And endings, when chosen, can be a form of mercy. Mark stopped calling after Claire was removed. That silence hurt more than his anger ever could. I told myself it was temporary, that he needed time to adjust, that sons raised to believe love means protection often collapse when protection becomes accountability. But deep down, I knew something darker was happening. He wasn't regrouping. He was choosing sides. The first sign came quietly. An email forwarded to Judith by a board ally who owed me nothing but decency. Subject line, alternative leadership proposal. It was a draft, not finalized, but real enough to matter. Mark had been meeting privately with 2 board members and an outside investor group, positioning himself as the victim of an overbearing mother who refused to let go. He painted me as emotionally compromised, vindictive, unstable after years of widowhood. He used my age without saying it. That cut deeper than any legal maneuver. Judith called me immediately. He's preparing to force you out. I sat, very still. How? He's pushing for a competency review, claiming your decisions are personal, not strategic. I closed my eyes. This was no longer just betrayal. This was character assassination. I remembered holding Mark's hand the night his father left, promising him that no matter what happened between adults, he would always be safe, always supported, always loved. And now he was using that love as leverage against me. The emotional wound reopened sharper this time. Not grief, not anger, disillusionment. I agreed to meet Mark when he finally called. We sat across from each other in a small conference room at the company. Neutral, witnessed, glass walls. You're trying to remove me, I said calmly. He didn't deny it. You're making this personal. You made it personal when you erased me, I replied. This is consequence. He rubbed his temples. Claire is gone. The board is watching me. Investors are nervous. I need stability. And I'm the instability I asked. He hesitated. They listen to you. They don't trust me anymore. There it was. Not resentment, fear. You don't want leadership, I said quietly. You want control without responsibility. His jaw tightened. I want my life back. So do I said. And I'm not taking yours. You're dismantling mine. He stood abruptly. If you don't step down voluntarily, this will get ugly. I looked up at him, at the boy I had defended for decades. This is already ugly, I said. You're just late to noticing. That night, I made a decision I had been avoiding. I would stop protecting him entirely, not emotionally, not legally, not narratively. Judith filed first. A formal notice asserting my full authority as majority shareholder and founder. A request for an independent psychological and fiduciary evaluation of all executive leadership, including Mark. If he wanted to question my competence, I would question everyone's. Fairly, publicly. The reaction was immediate. Board members called. Investors panicked. Mark sent a single text. "You're destroying us." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "No, I'm revealing us." The cliffhanger arrived 2 days later. Judith's voice was tight when she called. "Eleanor, we have a problem." "What kind?" "The kind involving a sealed trust you were never meant to see." My heart slowed. "What trust?" She paused. "The one your ex-husband set up for Mark, with conditions that may override everything." I closed my eyes. The past was not finished with me, and it was about to demand payment. I hadn't spoken my ex-husband's name aloud in years. Thomas Price, Mark's father, the man who taught my son how to charm, how to evade, how to frame cruelty as necessity. The man who left when Mark was 17 and returned only when it suited him. I thought he was gone from our lives. I was wrong. Judith laid the documents out on the table in her office. A trust established years ago, quietly, funded through offshore channels, disguised as deferred compensation from Thomas's later ventures. Mark was the beneficiary, and the condition was simple. If Eleanor Price were deemed unfit to manage her assets or business interests, the trust would activate full financial support for Mark and Grant Thomas advisory authority over any contested holdings. My hands went cold. "He planned this," I whispered. Judith nodded. "Years ago. This isn't reactive. It's strategic." I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, understanding. Thomas had never forgiven me for leaving him, for refusing to tolerate infidelity, for building a life without him. And now, through our son, he was still trying to win. "He's advising Mark," I said. "Yes," Judith replied. "And he's pushing the narrative that you're emotionally compromised." I laughed once, low, bitter. Of course he is. The irony was almost elegant. A man who abandoned his family, positioning himself as a guardian of stability. We moved fast. Judith scheduled my evaluation first. Not defensively, proactively. Independent experts. Full transparency. I welcomed it. If Thomas wanted to question my mind, I would put it on record. The evaluation was thorough, long, exhausting, but clean. No impairment, no emotional instability, no diminished capacity. The report was devastating. To Thomas, because the examiner added an unsolicited note. "Mrs. Price demonstrates exceptional cognitive resilience under prolonged emotional stress, likely developed through sustained professional leadership and personal adversity. Karma has a sense of humor." Then came the twist. During discovery related to the trust, Judith uncovered something Thomas never expected anyone to look for. The funds, they weren't clean. They were tied to a company under federal investigation for securities fraud, which meant the trust was vulnerable, which meant Thomas had exposed himself. When Mark learned this, he came to my house at midnight. He looked hollow, smaller than I'd ever seen him. "He lied to me," Mark said. "My father." "Yes," I replied. "He always does. He said you were dangerous." I waited. "He said you'd ruin everything if I didn't stop you." "And what do you think now?" I asked. He sank into a chair. "I don't know who to trust." I sat across from him. Not as a CEO, not as an adversary, as a mother who had already grieved this loss once. "You don't have to trust me," I said. "You just have to stop letting men who fear strong women tell you what safety looks like." Tears slid down his face, silent, uncontrolled. "I didn't mean to betray you," he whispered. "I know," I said, "but intention doesn't erase impact." Outside, thunder rolled, a storm breaking. Inside, the past finally stood exposed. But Thomas was not done, and neither was karma. Thomas Price resurfaced the way men like him always do, with confidence, with lawyers, with the assumption that time had softened me into someone easier to intimidate. The notice arrived on a Monday morning. Petition for declaratory judgment and protective oversight. He was asking the court to determine whether I should be restricted from exercising control over my assets and company interests due to alleged emotional bias and familial conflict. In simpler terms, he wanted a judge to take me out of the picture. Judith read the filing twice, then looked up at me. He's overreaching. Because he's desperate, I said. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Thomas knew momentum mattered. If he could cast doubt on my stability before the board regained full confidence in Mark's failure, he could still force a settlement. He underestimated one thing. I was no longer alone. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Intimate, wood-paneled, quiet in a way that amplifies every breath. Thomas sat across the aisle from me, older than I remembered, but unchanged in posture, relaxed, smiling faintly, as if we were attending a mutual friend's wedding instead of a legal confrontation. He didn't look at me until the judge entered. Then he nodded. I didn't return it. His attorney spoke first. A practice narrative, a concerned former spouse, a son caught between parents, a woman whose grief and age had allegedly clouded her judgment. They used words like volatile and entrenched. They never said irrational, but they implied it. When it was Judith's turn, she stood calmly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't attack. She documented. She presented the psychological evaluation, the governance records, the audit trail that showed my consistent decision-making over decades. Then she did something unexpected. She called Mark to the stand. I felt him tense beside me. His testimony was halting at first. He tried to protect everyone, himself, me, even his father. But truth has gravity. Eventually, he admitted that Thomas had advised him to question my competence, that the trust had been used as leverage, that Thomas had framed it as protection while encouraging escalation. Thomas leaned back, still smiling. Then Judith introduced the evidence he hadn't prepared for. The financial records tied to the trust. The judge leaned forward. Thomas's smile disappeared. His attorney whispered urgently. Papers shuffled. A quiet panic rippled. The judge asked a single question. Mr. Price, were you aware these funds were under federal investigation? Thomas hesitated. That hesitation was everything. The judge ordered a pause, requested supplemental filings, referred the matter to an external review. The hearing ended, not with a ruling, but with uncertainty. For Thomas, that was defeat. Outside the courtroom, he finally looked at me fully. You always did like playing the long game, he said. No, I replied. I like finishing what you abandon. He scoffed. You think you've won. I met his gaze. No, I think you've been exposed. He walked away without another word. Mark stood beside me, shaking. I didn't know, he said again. I believe you, I said. Now decide what kind of man you want to be. That night, news broke quietly. Federal authorities had opened a formal inquiry into Thomas's financial activities. The house of lies he had built to feel powerful was collapsing. But the final choice wasn't his. It was Mark's, and he still hadn't made it. Mark asked to meet me alone. No lawyers, no offices, no witnesses. We met at the old park where I used to take him when he was little. The swings were newer, the trees taller, but the bench was the same. He sat beside me, hands clasped. I don't know how to come back from this, he said. You don't come back, I replied. You move forward differently. He stared at the ground. My father wants me to fight. I know, I said. He says if I testify against him, he'll never forgive me. I let that sit. Mark Weiss said finally. Has your father ever forgiven anyone? He exhaled sharply. No. Then stop chasing a version of love that never existed. He was quiet for a long time. I spent my whole life trying not to be abandoned, he said. And I let myself become someone I don't recognize. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. You were taught that power keeps people from leaving, I said. It doesn't. Honesty does. The next week, Mark made his choice. He cooperated fully with investigators. He provided documents, emails, testimony. The trust was frozen. Thomas's advisory authority was revoked, pending outcome. The board reconvened. This time, Mark did not sit at the table. He resigned, not in anger, not in protest, In acknowledgement. "I'm not ready to lead," he said in his statement, "and I won't pretend otherwise." That humility stunned people. It stunned me too. I was asked again to take full executive control. Again, I declined. Instead, I proposed something radical: a succession plan that removed family entitlement entirely. Merit-based leadership, external oversight, clear boundaries. The board agreed unanimously. Claire filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Julia sent a message I didn't respond to. And Thomas was indicted before the end of the year. The escalation was over. The climax had passed. What remained was quieter, harder, healing. Mark moved away. Not far, but far enough to build a life that didn't orbit mine. We spoke occasionally, carefully, not as before, better. One evening, months later, I walked through my house and realized something profound. I was no longer waiting, not for apology, not for validation, not for permission. The revenge I thought I needed had transformed into release. And release, I learned, is the only ending that doesn't ask you to keep reliving the pain. But the story wasn't finished yet, because rebirth requires one final act: letting go. The first months, after everything collapsed, were strangely quiet. No lawsuits, no emergency calls, no whispered alliances forming in corners. Just the slow, unfamiliar sound of my own life settling into a shape that didn't revolve around damage control. I stepped back from the company entirely that spring. Not because I was forced, because I chose to. The board protested, of course. Investors wrote letters praising my steadiness during crisis. A judge even remarked off the record that my restraint had likely saved everyone years of litigation. But restraint was not the point. Freedom was. I sold my remaining operational interest and retained only a passive stake. Enough to ensure stability, not enough to trap me in responsibility that no longer belonged to me. On my last day in the office, I packed my things slowly. Not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to remember exactly what leaving on my own terms felt like. The weight of the door when I pulled it closed behind me. The echo of my heels in a hallway that no longer claimed me. The absence of dread. At home, I found myself confronting a different kind of silence. The silence of no longer being needed. For years, my identity had been stitched together by usefulness. Mother, founder, fixer. The woman people called when things went wrong. Now nothing was wrong, and no one was calling. The emotional wound shifted again. Less sharp, more hollow. I began to understand why so many women my age cling to broken systems. The pain of betrayal is familiar. The pain of emptiness is terrifying. I filled my days carefully. Morning walks, reading, reconnecting with friends I had slowly disappeared from while saving everyone else. Therapy, which I had always recommended and never prioritized for myself. One afternoon, my therapist asked a question that stopped me cold. What did you gain by being excluded? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had never framed it that way. I gained clarity, I said slowly, about who I am when I'm not negotiating for love. She nodded. And who are you? I thought about it all week. The answer arrived unexpectedly. At a Christmas fundraiser, 6 months later, a woman I barely knew approached me, eyes bright with recognition. You're Eleanor Price, she said. You don't know me, but your story saved my sanity. I frowned. I'm sorry. She laughed nervously. My children cut me out of their business last year. Told me I was too emotional, too involved. I stayed quiet until I watched your hearing online. My chest tightened. You didn't beg, she continued. You didn't collapse. You just stood there. And I realized I didn't have to disappear either. Something inside me unlocked. The silence I had feared was not emptiness. It was space. Space to choose who I would be next. That night, I started writing. Not publicly, just for myself. Notes, reflections, Truths I had swallowed for decades. By January, those notes became a proposal, a small advisory practice. Not corporate, not family, focused on women over 50 navigating betrayal in business and inheritance disputes. Judith was the first to encourage me. "You're good at this," she said. Not revenge, perspective. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been excluded from my own family's future. And in doing so, I had found a new one. But peace has a way of inviting one final test. And mine arrived in the form of an envelope I did not expect to open. The envelope came from the prison. I recognized Thomas's handwriting immediately. Even after all these years, it had the same deliberate arrogance. Each letter shaped like it deserved to be read. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page, no apology, no accountability, just a request. He wanted to see me. I laughed, out loud, alone in my kitchen. The audacity was almost admirable. My first instinct was to throw the letter away, to deny him even the satisfaction of response. But something stopped me. Not anger, closure. I didn't owe him forgiveness, but I did owe myself completion. I agreed. The prison visiting room smelled like disinfectant and resignation. Thomas looked smaller than I remembered. Not humbled, just reduced. He smiled when he saw me. "You look well," he said. "I am," I replied. "That's not an accident." He gestured for me to sit. "I suppose you've come to gloat." "No," I said. "I've come to listen." That surprised him. "They always underestimate you," he said. "Still, you underestimated me," I replied. "Everyone else learned." He sighed. "I never thought Mark would turn on me." "He didn't turn on you," I said. He turned toward himself. Thomas scoffed. "You always did poison him against me." I leaned forward. "You taught him that love was conditional. I taught him it wasn't. That's not poison. That's antidote." He was quiet then. "I wanted control," he admitted finally, "because control meant I couldn't be left." I nodded. "And it ensured you would be." We sat in silence. "I suppose you won," he said at last. I shook my head. This was never about winning. Then what was it about? I stood, about refusing to be erased. As I walked away, I felt nothing dramatic. No triumph, no rage, just finality. That was the last time I saw Thomas Price. Months later, Mark sent a letter. Not an apology, not a plea. A thank you for not saving him from himself. I keep it in a drawer I rarely open, because my story doesn't live there anymore. It lives in the life I built. After exclusion taught me my worth, and the hardest revenge of all, living well without them. By the time the leaves turned again, I barely recognized the woman who had stood frozen on that Thanksgiving porch years earlier. Not because I was stronger in the way people expect, not louder, not sharper, but quieter in a way that felt earned. My advisory practice had grown without me advertising it. Women found me through referrals, whispered recommendations, the kind that come with relief rather than excitement. Divorced founders, widows navigating inheritance disputes, grandmothers suddenly excluded from family companies they had financed and protected for decades. They didn't come to me asking how to get revenge. They came asking how to stop doubting themselves. I never promised outcomes. I promised clarity. One woman, 63, told me through tears that her sons had moved company shares without telling her. Another 59 had been removed from a family trust for her own good. The language was always gentle. The harm never was. I saw my past reflected in each of them. And I saw how common it was for women our age to be quietly sidelined under the guise of concern. We met in neutral rooms, coffee shops, conference spaces, living rooms that still smelled like family dinners that no longer happened. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, I never told them what to do. I asked questions. Who benefits if you stay silent? What happens if you stop explaining yourself? What are you afraid they'll take that they haven't already taken emotionally. The answers changed them. They changed me too. I stopped framing my story as something that happened to me. It became something that happened through me. A transition, not a wound. That winter, Mark came to town unexpectedly. He didn't call ahead. He stood on my porch like a boy again, hands in pockets, shoulders uncertain. "I'm not here to stay," he said quickly. "Just passing through." I nodded. "Do you want coffee?" We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had once spread legal documents and felt my life fracture into before and after. "I started therapy," he said. "Real therapy, not the kind Dad used to manipulate." I smiled faintly. "Good. I'm learning things I don't like," he admitted. "That's usually how it works." He looked at me, then really looked. "You're different. So are you." "I used to think power meant never needing anyone," he said. "Now I think it means being honest when you do." I let that land. "I don't expect us to be what we were," he added. "I just wanted you to know, I'm trying." I reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "That's enough." When he left, I didn't feel loss. I felt completion. Not everything broken needs to be repaired to be resolved. Some things are meant to transform. That spring, I declined an invitation to speak at a corporate summit. Instead, I accepted one at a small retreat for women over 50, navigating family and workplace betrayal. No cameras, no applause, just truth. I told them the part no one likes to say out loud. "Revenge isn't the end," I said. "It's the bridge. The real work begins when you step off it." I watched their faces shift, recognition, resistance, relief, and I realized something quietly profound. I no longer needed to be seen by the people who erased me. I was seen by myself, and that was enough. But stories like this don't end with peace alone. They end with choice, and mine was coming. On the anniversary of the Thanksgiving, where everything began, I did something symbolic. I hosted dinner, not for family, for myself. I cooked deliberately, slowly, foods I loved, but had stopped making because no one else appreciated them. I set the table for one, lit a candle, poured a glass of wine I had been saving, and I gave thanks, not for what I lost, for what I refused to lose, my dignity, my clarity, my voice. I thought about the journey in its entirety, the injustice that arrived, disguised as practicality, the emotional wound that made me question my worth, the tension of knowing something was wrong, but not yet knowing how to name it, the escalation that forced truth into the open, the confrontation that stripped illusion from reality, the karma that arrived not as punishment, but exposure, and finally, the rebirth that came from stepping back instead of clinging on. I had been excluded from a will, but I inherited myself. I had been erased from a company, but I reclaimed my authority. I had been manipulated by a toxic family dynamic that mistook control for love, but I broke the pattern. If there is one truth I want women my age to hear, it is this: being excluded is not proof of your irrelevance. It is often proof of your power. People erase what they fear will challenge their narrative. They exclude what reminds them of obligations they'd rather avoid. They diminish women who no longer play their assigned role quietly. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can beg to be included again, or you can watch, carefully understand exactly what the exclusion means, and decide whether you even want to belong to something that requires your silence. I chose the second path, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. Today, my life is smaller on paper and larger in meaning. I choose my work. I choose my relationships. I choose when to engage and when to walk away. I no longer confuse loyalty with endurance. I no longer confuse love with obligation. And I no longer fear being left out. Because the moment I stopped chasing inclusion, I discovered something far more powerful: self-respect. If this story resonated with you, If you have ever been excluded, dismissed, or quietly erased by family or colleagues who benefited from your silence, I want you to know this. You are not invisible. You are not too old to demand respect. And you are not wrong for stepping back. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is not destruction. It is clarity. If this story spoke to you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this, and none of us are done being seen.